Hello and welcome to Tech for Non-Techies, the only podcast that demystifies the fast-growing technology sector. I'm your host, Sophia Matveeva, Chicago-based MBA and tech entrepreneur. My aim here is to give you the skills, knowledge and confidence to find opportunities in the tech sector, whether that's through founding a company, getting a dream job, or bringing a fresh perspective to your work. Hello, my friends. In this episode, we are going to cover user experience design. This episode is actually a recording of an interview that I did with a user experience designer called Sang Wald for an article that I wrote for Forbes. The Forbes article is going to be in the show notes, and the Forbes article is about what user experience design is and how to become a user experience designer. So obviously this episode goes into that, but also very helpfully, Sang talks about how to work with user experience designers, whether you are a non-technical founder or a product manager or even an engineer. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and all the books and references that he makes are going to be in the show notes. So check those out. Now, a little bit about Sang. Sang is a very experienced user experience designer. He is self-taught, which I find exceptionally inspiring, and he now sits on the design standards board for the General Assembly. He has worked with startups and with multinationals, and he's worked in India, in Tokyo, and now in London. So without further ado, here's Sang.
UX, it's one of those terminologies that's like really become popular over the years, but it's not fully understood. I think it's misunderstood or half understood or thought of as something slightly different. And when I explain it to people, I usually want to tell a story of the six blind men with an elephant. Have you ever heard of that story?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Right. Exactly. So, six blind men, they touch an elephant, and one person touches the trunk, another the leg, the body. Each person says, "Okay, an elephant is like a tree or a wall or a snake or a big fan or whatever that is, the thing that they perceived it to be." So UX is very similar to that, right? Some people call it. They look at an app and they see a nice animation and they say, "Oh, this has such a nice UX." Or some people think it's the user interface. Some people will think it's the usability or the accessibility. So the simple fact is that it's all of those things, right? But if you Google what is UX or the definition of UX, you will see tons and tons of definition. But my favorite one happens to be the one that is defined by the International Standardization Organization, the ISO.
Okay.
So the ISO, they define UX in a way that I really think captures the essence of what it is. So they call it a person's perceptions and responses that result from the use and anticipated use of a product, system, or service.
Well, that is good.
So I really like that definition, and that really captures it because it talks about it's a personal thing, right? So what is good UX may be different from you and me. So it's your perception and the responses, and it talks about the use or anticipated use. So when you think about think about an app that is for hiring a cab, right? So there's a thing that already comes to your mind, right? So that's because you know that app and you know that it's good because you've used it. But currently you're not using it, but you're just thinking about it. So you already have an experience just thinking about that app or that service. And then when you use it, you also have a certain kind of experience, and after you use it, you also have a certain kind of experience. So the before the use, during the use, and after the use, what is that experience? So that is, to me, is what UX is.
Interesting. So how is it different from UI?
So UI, if we look at the words, right? The user
Yeah.
experience is UX, and UI stands for user interface. So the interface that a user uses to interact with that system,
Yeah.
or the service, or the product, right? So generally speaking, when people think about UI, they would think about graphics, things that you can see. So if you look at a website, they look at the buttons and the headers and the images and the input fields, the forms that you fill in. But interface is not just the graphical part, right? So if you think of Amazon Echo or
That's a good
Apple
point.
HomePod, so you interact with them using voice. So user interface, the interface become voice, right? So there are different ways to interact with a system or product. So that interface that you use to interact with the system or the product or a service is the user interface. So for services, for example, if you think about a hotel, the user interface is like the staff, right? You walk up and the first interaction that you have is with the person that opens the door for you. So that's the user interface with the hotel. So anything that you
Interesting.
use to interact with a product, a system, or service is this user interface. That being said, many people would connect that with the graphical user interface, what is visible, not the visual. I mean, not no, I mean the auditory, right? So, sometimes you can just interact with voice, and depending on the feedback that it gives you, you know that something's right or something's wrong or something has completed or failed. So based on the feedback that you have from the system. So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yes, that's a really interesting point. And is it usually, in a tech team, would a UX person be the same person as a UI person?
Yes and no. So it really depends on the size of the company and the size of the team. And so if you think about UX and UI, UX in UX, what we call the umbrella of UX. And within that umbrella, you have different disciplines like visual design, information architecture, interaction design, usability, user research, or content strategy. So all of these fall within the umbrella of UX. So by default, a UI designer is kind of already doing some part of UX. So because UI is a forms one part of the whole, right? Within the umbrella of UX. So, however, in most companies, it's impossible for one person or in any organization to do all of the parts that make up the user experience. So, the simple answer is like, yeah, you have to have different roles to do different things within the product or a service. But in the end, I think everybody plays a role to create the UX.
So do you mean by everybody, do you mean people like community managers and the product managers, basically the entire team? So you don't even have to have designer in your job title.
Exactly. So that's my understanding of what UX is, right? So I think UX, the user experience, is so important. It's so critical that you shouldn't put it on the shoulder of one person and call them, you are the UX designers, because everybody has a part to play. Engineers
That's a
have a
really good
part to
point.
play, because engineers, like the way they write the code, can impact how fast the app loads.
Yeah.
Or the engineers that are working the back end creating the server, or the technical definition, like the business process, how it is defined impacts the user experience as well. So for me, it's like we are all together UX designers, and we have different roles that we play within the team.
Cool, interesting. So in that case, I'm just going to jump to a few questions forward. In that case, what traits make for great UX designers?
The biggest traits, the good traits, one is empathy, and the other one is not having an ego. So understanding that you're not the user, because the main thing about user experience is that user experience, not your experience. So understanding the users, and that comes from understanding what are their goals, what are the tasks that users have to do, and why do they do them, right? So users, they don't just use an app. They use an app to achieve something. They use an app to have a good, they want to have a good time with your friends. They want to go eat out and have a good time. So in order to do that, they use different tools. And one of them might happen to be Google Maps, or it might be Open Table, or whatever tool they use, or maybe it's a local a flyer that they see, or maybe it's just a listing of restaurants, whatever that is. So there's a goal. A user has a goal. They want to achieve that goal. In order to do that, there are different tasks that they have to perform. And understanding that is the most important thing.
Cool. And so
having empathy, yeah.
In terms of training, what kind of things, what kind of training do you suggest that UX designers should have? And one of the reasons why I'm asking this is that I see quite a lot of smart people, basically non-technical people, who want to participate in the tech boom. And those are essentially the people who come to my events and read my Forbes articles, because they're like, okay, the money seems to be in tech. I don't really want to become a developer because it sounds boring, or I don't want to do a 3-year degree on computer science. What else can I do? And so, like, UX design seems one of the options for people who are that way inclined anyway. First of all, what do you think of that statement? Do you agree with that or not? Yeah, let's start with that, and then let's talk about the training that good UX designers should have, in your opinion.
Okay, so is the first question, is UX design a profession that might be suitable for people who are not necessarily into engineering and development?
Yes, but
okay.
but people who want to participate in the tech boom, which I think is basically
yeah. All right. Okay. So yeah, definitely, because UX is something that one of those things that is anybody can do, but not everybody can master, right?
So I like that.
I think,
yeah. Sorry.
So, and no worries, and thank you for that, because I think that the learning curve is not that steep. It's an easy entry, because human beings are naturally curious, right? We are naturally thinking about why. As kids, if you hang out with a 3-year-old kid, they'll be like, but why is it? Oh, I want to have ice cream. You can't eat it, but why can't I eat ice cream? Right? It's about questioning, right? It's about why. It's philosophy. And so why do users have problems? Why is it a problem to the users? Why do they want to do X instead of Y? So being able to ask those questions and being honest with your questions, and not asking leading questions, that's the beginning of good UX design. So I think anybody has the capacity to ask questions, which makes them qualified to become UX designers automatically. However, just like any other job, in order to be good at it, you also need to keep your own egos and your own biases in check.
Cool.
So in the sense of innate capability, people have that, and then we can also talk about what are the technical skills that you need, right, in order to become a good user.
So I guess the technical skills that would come from training. So if if somebody goes to one of these, here's you speak at this event, or they read the Forbes article, and they're like, yeah, I'm a curious person, and I want to get into the tech boom. Let me try this UX design thing. What do you suggest for that person? What should they do?
So there's different ways to do. One is you can be self-taught, right? So a person like myself, I'm self-taught. I didn't go to design school ever. I've never gone to taken a formal education in design, but I discovered design and I got interested in it. So I read a lot of books and articles. So that's one way to do that: read books and practice. The other way is to go to courses that provide UX design. So like, General Assembly is one of them. There's also another school called Flatiron in London. And I'm sure there are many other schools that you can go to. And even universities, I think, now have UX design as a course. So there's self-taught or vocational schools that you go for like a few weeks, and also university degrees. So there are different options that you can take.
Cool. And so what are your favorite resources that you would recommend? So you said books and articles. Are there any particularly great books or articles or blogs that you follow?
So this is, most designers will know this and they'll laugh at me for saying this, because this is like the ABC of interaction design. So there's a gentleman named Don Norman.
Don, how do you spell that? Don Norman.
Don, D-O-N, Don.
Okay, like Donald Draper.
Yeah. Or Donald, Donald Norman, probably, and so his full name is Donald, but he's mainly
the design of
known as Don
things.
Norman. That's correct. Yes, that's the book that I was going to recommend. So Don Norman is the first person who has the job title user experience. That was back in the 1980s. He used to work at Apple, and they have what they call the user experience office.
Yeah.
And so he wrote a book, The Design of Everyday Things. That's a book that I think it's essential for everybody who wants to get into UX to read.
Cool.
And then of course there's so many other books. Another book that I would recommend is a book called A Project Guide to UX Design. Yeah, I can type that out for you.
Cool. Thank you.
So the reason I like that, the Project Guide to UX Design, is because it's different from the Don Norman's book of Design of Everyday Things. The Design of Everyday Things talks about interaction design, like being aware of bad design. How can you create a good design based on these fundamental interaction design principles that he create or he put together. And A Project Guide to UX Design is a book that takes you from start to finish, the whole process of UX design. So, how do you make estimation? So how do you, gather business requirements? How do you do research? How do you do workshops? How do you do user research and all of that? So I think that if you want to learn by yourself, A Project Guide to UX Design is the book that I would strongly recommend.
Cool. And then, finally, I just wanted to ask, how do UX designers interact with other people on the team, on the tech team? So how do they interact with developers? How do they interact with product managers? And if it's a startup, how do they interact with non-technical founders?
Okay, cool. So they're it's user experience design, just like any other job role. You would have different levels of seniority, and also depending on the organization or size of organization or style of operation, you would also have different levels of access to different people. In a big organization, or when you talk about developers, so usually you're talking about a UX designer who works on the on the same team with engineers. Traditionally, in the past, right? If we just quickly touch upon the past, in the past, it's like a UX designer or a designer comes up with a solution, amazing solution, and then they present to the engineers, and the engineer says, "No, that's not possible."
Yeah.
Or the engineers will say, "We'll always stick to the easiest to implement features." However, I think these days the good news is that engineers have a good understanding of UX. UX has become such common word, unexpected thing. So there's so many engineers who understand design, the value of UX. So it makes the world so much better.
So are you saying that engineers should make an effort to learn UX? Like, I don't know, maybe take a course or read a book?
I would say, an appreciation, right? So The point I was trying to make is that engineers have come a long way to understand UX actually. So a good UX designer, right? A good UX designer would when they think about a feature or a solution, they would consider the technical feasibility. How easy is it to implement? And they would consult with the engineers. They wouldn't just go in a room, lock themselves, and come up with a solution. A good UX designer would sit down with an engineer and say, hey, by the way, this is the idea that I have. They quickly sketch out on paper or whiteboard and say, what do you think? And it's collaboration, right? So the engineers has a different viewpoint. So they can say, oh, if you do it that way, I think it's a great idea, but it's going to be too heavy for the users, or it will consume too much memory on the user's device. So the engineer is able to give good input into the solution process. So that's how designers should interact with developers in a healthy environment.
So what level of development knowledge should designers have? Like, should they take a course or something?
Not necessarily. They can just read up on, like, for example, if you're working on designing something for the web, you can read up on what is progressive web design, progressive web apps, responsive web design. So the platform that you operate in, read about it. Read about what are the capabilities, and you don't have to be an engineer. You can just read about what are the features, the limitations, and the capabilities. If you're working on an iOS, for example, you can read the Apple HIG. It's called HIG, Human Interface Guidelines. You can read it. You can read that. You can read for if you're designing something for Android. You can also read the Google Material Design and the developers handbook. I call it handbook, but I don't think it's called handbook. It's called Developer Material Design or something like that. So don't quote me on that. We have to confirm what it's called. But so yeah, there are materials out there that you can go and read. So my strong recommendation for designers is to read those documents, and you don't have to master them. You just have to know that they're there and reference them.
Interesting. You seem to be saying that actually you don't need to go and do all this formal stuff. You don't need to take courses. You basically need to read and do. That's the best thing. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah. So I guess it depends on what you mean by read and do. So I'm saying that you don't have to master all the engineering stuff as a UX designer. You just need to know that those kind of information are out there and you can access them. And when you work on something, read up on the relevant documentations. That's it. You don't have to memorize them. You just have to know and reference them.
Awesome.
So we just covered about working with developers.
Yeah.
So product managers kind of represent the business side.
Yeah.
They understand the business requirements and the business rules and the limitations and the budgeting and all kinds of things. So when a user experience designer or designer work with a product manager, the product manager is the one that is thinking about the business viability of the solution. So a user experience designer can think about, okay, let's delight the users and let's make it really interesting and fun and engaging to use. But they also have to balance that with the business side of, okay, how much time do we have? How much budget do we have? What is the most essential thing that we have to do? So the product managers are the ones that are, in a sense, helping the user, the experience designers prioritize on what is more important depending on the budget.
Oh, I like that. PMs help UX designers to prioritize. And is that the same for founders? Because I'm assuming kind of in this way, the founder is the same like a product manager.
So yeah, so in a product manager are like the founders in a business, right? So if you work for a big company and building a software, you don't have founders, but the product managers kind of represent the business side or the founder side. So if you're working with a founder, then you, unless it's a big company, if it's a startup and it's a team of, let's say, less than 10 people or less than 20 people, then the founder becomes a product manager or the product owner, right? So the founder plays the role of the product manager as well. However, of course, the founder can also have other product managers to manage their product as well. In interacting with the founder, though, the designers, they have to be very bold at asking the questions to the founder, because founders, they're visionary, they're amazing entrepreneurs who have a big vision. And designers have to say, okay, is that what you want to achieve? Let's make sure that these are the pain points that we're going to solve, right? So the designers have to say, okay, Miss Founder, Mrs. Founder, this is a great idea. Why don't we go and validate it? Why don't we go test this idea? Why don't we talk to users and understand if this is the pain point that they actually have? Because it's very easy for a founder or anybody who has a big idea to get married to that idea, to want to see that idea become alive and become biased.
Yeah.
So the job of the designer is to say, okay, that's a great idea, and what we need to do is let's go and let's agree that it's a hypothesis that we have to test, and let's come up with a way to test this idea, and let the data tell us what is the right thing to do. So that's the role of the designer.
So it's a very close working relationship, which can also be quite sensitive.
Yes, it's quite sensitive, and you have to use the right language, and you also have to find someone who values testing, right?
Yeah.
So because sometimes I think this happens not just founders. When people have power, it used to be called, I don't know if it's still popular, but it used to be called HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion.
Yeah. I know. Yes.
Yeah. So that can happen. So I think the role of the designer is to say, okay, great idea. How do we test that idea if it's true or false? Or how do we go and validate that?
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So
Okay.
like silence the hippo. Cool.
I wouldn't call it silence, but yeah, it's
tame it, domesticate it.
Yeah.
Domesticated hippo. That's what we need.
If you enjoyed this episode, which I hope you did, it will be super helpful if you could subscribe and leave a rating and a review. Not only would that be helpful to me and to Sang, it would also help people like you, so people who are interested in this kind of content, discover it. So please subscribe, rate and review. That will be very helpful. If you like learning about aspects of technology for non-technical people, then you have to check out the Tech for Non-Techies membership. Sang actually taught a masterclass on UX for our members, and the recording and notes are all in Tech for Non-Techies. So to become a member, just go to techfornontechies.co. That's techfornontechies.co, and the link is in the show notes. Thanks for listening.